This is the Maxime Leadership Podcast.
Crisis is just one manifestation of what happens at midlife. That same energy that creates the crisis can create all kinds of other transformations, and it usually does. In my book, I describe what I call 3 winds of change that happen at midlife. The first wind of change is physiological. Our bodies are changing, obviously. The second wind of change is, I think for me, the changes were happening in my early 40s, leading up to selling the company, and then the 4 years afterwards. I went through a divorce at the same time, moved to Singapore. That was a lot of change. So I think maybe the work that I've done since then is looking back and it's kind of the question, could I have done all that in a healthier manner? Could I have done it in a more effective manner and not burn everything down?
Welcome to the Maxime Leadership Podcast. My guest today is Aneace Haddad. Aneace is a former tech CEO who now serves as C-suite executive and external senior advisor at McKinsey. Good morning, Aneace.
Hello, Max. Wonderful seeing you again.
Nice to see you, and thank you for joining us all the way from Singapore.
Yeah, it's a bit later in the day than it is for you.
No, but it's a real pleasure to have you here, and thank you for carving some of your precious time to talk to us about a very important topic. Now we're going to cover a large range on our discussion, but you specialize on some of your books and your work around midlife crisis and how this could be channeled into some positive energy for leadership. And before we get into the detail of the conversation today, would you mind telling us a bit more about yourself? How was it like where you grew up?
Right. Okay. That's a big question. It's like when people ask me, where are you from? It's one of the hardest questions for me to answer because I don't have a simple answer. I was born in Texas. My mother is from Texas. My father's from Iraq. By the time I was 21, I had spent half my life overseas. I already spoke French fluently. So it's quite an international environment I grew up in. Became a techie. I was a programmer early in my career, and I built a payment software company in the south of France and grew it to 30 countries. Sold it in 2007 when I was 47, and then thought I was going to be a serial entrepreneur. But I discovered that I liked people more than computers, which was a strange thing for a programmer to discover. And that gradually threw me into what you just mentioned, a midlife crisis that caused me to reinvent myself as a C-suite executive coach. So for the last 15 years, that's what I've been doing. That's in a nutshell, answering your question as simply as I can, which wasn't very simple.
No, but that's very helpful, and I take a lot of interest in what you have to say because I am 47 today, and I want to know what's around the corner for me. And
do you know the happiness curve?
Tell me about it.
So the happiness curve is statistical research that has been done in many different countries, and a number of researchers have tried to disprove it. But basically what it shows, it's a U, and it shows that at the beginning of our lives, it's a U, and at the beginning of our lives, our happiness is higher. It comes down, and the very lowest point statistically is 47, and then it starts to pick up again.
Oh, wow. That's great. No, I'm grateful for the laugh I've had so far, and I'm excited to know that it's only going to grow from here. So can't wait to see it. So then you talked about your international experience, being born in the US, living across the world and speaking different languages. When did your early interest in tech started, and how what was that journey to becoming a programmer and launching your own tech company?
Oh, as a boy, I liked electronics. Um, in the US back then, there was a chain of stores called Radio Shack, and they would sell. Later, it became a computer store, but but really in the 60s and 70s, Radio Shack was they sold electronic components and kits for boys, basically to build things with electronics. So I loved building things with electronics at that time, and I think um, that's what that's what transformed gradually into computer science, programming. So it's kind of an extension to that.
Hmm. Radio Shack, like in the what's it? Young Sheldon, right? He liked to go to Radio Shack. I remember in that series.
Exactly. That's exactly the chain because it was very geeky. It was a geek store back then.
Right. And so what was the company that you launched, and what services did you offer?
Okay, so that was in France. Welcome Real Time. We provided software for banks that was in for credit cards and debit cards. You know when they were putting chips on the cards? So back then, 25 years ago, most credit cards and debit cards around the world didn't have chips in them, and they were just beginning to move to chips. And that chip technology was invented in France, and two of the main manufacturers were one in Paris, one in Gémenos near Marseille. So the technology was born there. What I brought was kind of an American Silicon Valley kind of mindset where I created a software company to develop software for those, which was unheard of because in France it was all done by the industrial company. So my company separated the software from the industrial part, and then we signed up software licenses with banks around the world. Um, Now it's old. The company still exists. It's part of another company now, and they don't do the software inside the chips anymore, I don't think. That was all a certain period of almost 25 years ago, so things have changed since then. 20 years ago, okay, 25.
Hmm. Can you tell us about the journey of how did you come up with the idea, and how did you go from the idea to making it happen? Because it's something, to have an idea on and seeing a new technology coming up and trying to take advantage of the wave. What was it like, the journey of creating something?
Oh, it's what can I say that's relevant today? Um, it was such a long time ago. Um, for me, it was a search to identify a niche that I could fill that had value. That was the difficult part. It was I didn't want to be nice to have. I wanted to provide something that that the buyer, in this case the banks, would find extremely valuable. So it was quite difficult to find the right version of technology that fit the right niche and the right customers, clients, but also um, something that I didn't discover until much later was there was an element of the technology. There was the element of the offer that had nothing to do with the technology, It was the way we packaged it with an exclusivity agreement for the banks when they launched so that they could get to market first. And what I didn't understand clearly at the time was that they were spending tens of millions of dollars upgrading their systems for these new chip cards. So adding another million or so for the software was not a big deal if it created a differentiation for them. And in this case, it allowed them to spend $50 to $100 million in advertising because they were differentiating. And I hadn't made that connection. So the software represented maybe 10% of the total technology costs, but it was a drop in the bucket compared to the advertising costs. And I had no connection with that at the time. So it took me a very, very long time to figure out the levers that would cause the product to take off. And it was for a short time. There was a window of banks converting, and the technology fit into that window. I think what's much more challenging is a lot of the things that are happening today that deploy much faster than 25 years ago, and that are far more pervasive than simply filling a window.
Yes, indeed, because we have a lot of AI entrepreneurs trying to take advantage of large language models, hype that was popularized with ChatGPT. And from your experience, I know it was 25 years ago, what would anyone trying to come into that space today, what should be the thought process that you had that could be relevant again today? You talk about finding a niche. Is there anything else that you would share?
So back then, I used to use a mantra. And after I sold my company, I mentored a few startups, and I worked with a number of startups. And I had a mantra back then. I haven't used this for years. It's so what? Who cares? Why me? And it's important to have really solid answers, or it was important then. I don't know what it is like now. I don't work with startups anymore. But answering the questions, so what? The answer needs to be crisp, and it really needs to be catchy to where you're really addressing a real problem. So what? It means it's not some small thing. Who cares is to really get clarity on who it is that you're solving a pain point for. And very often we think that we're solving a problem for a large group of people, when in fact we're only solving it for a small group, and we're pricing the product for a large group when really we're only going to sell a few, so we need to price it higher. So we can get confused if we don't answer the who cares question properly. And it means like not who cares a little bit, but who really, really cares about this, for whom this is really, really vital. And the third question is, why me? Why are you? Why are you doing this? Why is the team together doing this? And if you're clear on why this is important to you, your whole pitch, your whole positioning is clear. So what? Who cares? Why me? If you can answer those very succinctly, it makes it much easier to stay on track, to stay focused, to keep people aligned, whether it's shareholders, employees, partners, clients. So that was a powerful, and I think I only discovered that mantra near the end, and I wish I had discovered it earlier when I was starting my company.
That's I think that's very insightful and valid not only on the startup world, but definitely for startups. I think it's a very important message for people to hear. And then you went on, you sold your company, and you left the entrepreneur world. Well, not quite, but that technology space. Why is that?
It was gradual. I thought I was going to be a serial entrepreneur because I thought I have only one path in life. And so I put a lot of money into starting another venture, but I really didn't like it, and it didn't go anywhere. And then it was very scary because I thought I only had one path. So I wanted to continue. but I didn't want to continue. And then through the mentoring, as I was mentoring startups, I started a little bit of coaching. And then I discovered that I was most proud of my people when I was building my company. I was most proud that people that used to work for me became CEOs, CTOs, CFOs of other companies. And I was quite surprised. I was more proud of that than I was about the technology, the patents. I wrote the patents myself. I filed them myself. I did patent infringement lawsuits against competitors. I hired the lawyers myself. I ran the lawsuits. So I was deep into the technology, but none of those left as much sense of fulfillment and positive memories as seeing people that worked for me go on and do bigger things. So that realization, that's the liking people more than computers part. So that gradually brought me into coaching. But it was a 3-year, 4-year, 5-year process of transition. It was a painful transition because I used to speak to at payment conferences around the world. Bank boards would have me come in and talk about innovation, and then you become a coach, one of tens of thousands. So it was a difficult transition, letting go of the past, letting go of all the authority and everything, the expertise that I had.
Mm. Yes, indeed. And you talked about realization, which means that it's probably something that you had in you before. If you
Yeah.
were to look back with a hindsight, what are signs in your earlier year, when you were younger or when you started your career? Are there earlier signs that would have pointed you towards the fact that you like more people than computers?
I think I was extremely surprised. So there were signs, but I didn't, they came as a very big surprise. Even just a year ago, somebody from the company wrote to me, um, who started as an intern, and now 25 something years later is a very senior person in the company. He wrote to me just out of the blue saying how much my presence is still there, and the things that I'd left behind are still in the walls. That all this was all in French, so that's sounding weird as I say it in English. Um, and and again, it surprised me. Um, so there was something in my way of being, even back then, that was memorable, and I don't know what it was.
Indeed. And then you transitions gradually to
Yeah.
to becoming a coach. And how did you turn to the topic of midlife crisis?
So midlife, I've been on the topic for a few years. I don't often use the term crisis. Um, Crisis is just one manifestation of what happens at midlife. That same energy that creates the crisis can create all kinds of other transformations, and it usually does. So I've been very interested. I'm 64. I'm almost 65 now. Um, and so that period of my life, when I look back, I see that it was an extremely fruitful period. It was painful, especially the first half of it. In my early 40s, mid 40s, even late 40s was a difficult period, and then it turned around and things started to really change. There's so much energy in that period, and when I look back, I can see that if I had let go of the past earlier, then the joyfulness of that midlife period could have come out faster. So I'm very intrigued by the transformations that happen at midlife. I've been coaching people across different ages for a number of years now. And then 2 years ago, because I was noticing these differences at midlife, 2 years ago, I decided I would stop coaching individuals and teams under 40 because I really wanted to focus and really get to the bottom of why am I attracted to that period and what is it that's different. So when I made that decision, I had to give up a good bit of revenue, give up some big projects that involved coaching groups that were younger. And so in order to make that decision worthwhile, I did a lot of research, and it came up with my second book, Soaring Beyond Midlife, to really understand the mechanisms that are happening during that period. And there's a lot that's researched now that shows the power during that phase. So it's a period of life that I'm very, very excited about, and I love working with people in that phase of their lives.
So how do you define midlife? What's that period, age group?
I use the rough numbers that are used by the vast majority of research and stuff. It's from 40 to 60. And obviously, it's not like 39 and 11 months. I'm not there yet. And all of a sudden, 40, I've hit it. It's obviously gradual. But I use it as a thumbnail, 40 to 60.
40, 60. So can you walk us through what happened during that phase? What's we all know about teenage years and talk about teenage years, and then we have some stereotypical views of what midlife crisis means or midlife challenges. Yeah. What are those challenges that you've observed, and how can we detect that we are gradually falling into that?
I find fascinating that this link with teenage years, because the research shows that the changes we go through at midlife are kind of comparable to what we go through in our teenage years. So it's kind of like a second adolescence without the acne and without the mood swings. Well, there are mood swings, but not the same stuff. In my book, I describe what I call 3 winds of change that happen at midlife. The first wind of change is physiological. Our bodies are changing, obviously. We're getting older. We put on weight more easily. We don't have as much stamina as we used to have. Hormones are starting to change. We start to have some possible health issues. We also become aware that we'll probably live much longer than our parents and grandparents. So we become aware that we might be active much longer. So these things start to change how we think. The second wind of change is neurological. Our brains are changing. And the changes accelerate at midlife. So we have the prefrontal cortex that's slowing down, which means that we forget where we put our car keys. We forget our phone somewhere. We might forget how a cell on the spreadsheet works when we're presenting to the board. Whereas in the past, we would remember every single detail. Now we don't grasp things in the same way. But at the same time, the 2 hemispheres are talking more. So our right hemisphere, left hemisphere are communicating more together, which means that we can see patterns that maybe we couldn't see when we were a little bit younger. We can connect the dots. We're more comfortable with ambiguity and paradox. So when we're younger, if there is an or, like, for example, work-life balance, either I have a great job or I have a great life, one or the other. We know in coaching that you can replace the or with an and you can say, oh, you can have both. But when our brain is younger, we want to resolve that faster because we're not comfortable with the paradox. As we age, we become a bit more comfortable with it. So we can sit with an open question and not need to have an answer as quickly. Our empathy changes. So another neurological change is that our cognitive empathy comes down. So our ability to understand other people intellectually, begins to slow down. However, our emotional empathy increases. So we come to situations where we may find ourselves feeling, wow, I don't understand why you just said what you did, but I really get you. And it's fascinating that we can, if we lean into that and we can develop and we allow that to develop, it means that we can be in the middle of more conversations with people that disagree with us and still hold it together and move forward. So that's a very powerful leadership, what I call a superpower, um, because it allows us to deal with complexity and ambiguity in a much more effective manner than we were when we were younger. That's the second wind of change. The third one is parental. So um, generally, at that age, our kids are growing up and maybe leaving home, and our perceptions of who we are as parents is changing. And we start to realize that we can't parent in the same way as when the kids were younger. Um, and I see direct links with management is that we tend to bring the same parenting style to work. So when our kids are younger, we act more like managers. We're KPI driven. If you do this, this will happen. If you don't do this, this other thing will happen. When the kids grow up and leave home, that doesn't work anymore. We need to find new value in being a parent, which is more inspirational, more empowering, treating them as adults. And it's exactly the same thing that we see that's needed in leadership to move to that next level. So all of these things are happening at midlife, and they could lead to a crisis, or it could lead to a real transformation.
That's very powerful, and I think we'll take time to unwind each aspect of of those changes that you're referring to. If we bring it a bit more personal, how was it for you going through that phase and facing these changes?
I think for me, the changes were happening in my early 40s, leading up to selling the company, and then the 4 years afterwards. I went through a divorce at the same time. I had a large part of my company was based in Singapore, so I was coming to Singapore very often. So in that same period, in that same chapter of my life, sold the company, divorced, moved to Singapore. That was a lot of change, um, and and I think it was a way of kind of processing these changes that are happening. Not the healthiest way of processing them. So I think maybe the work that I've done since then is looking back and it's kind of the question: could I have done all that in a healthier manner? Could I could I have done it in a more effective manner and not burn everything down? I think there's a bit of that thought behind both of my books, actually, both of the books that have come out in the last few years.
Indeed, and I often ask myself the same question, and maybe I'll start with that when you're talking about the three wind of change, starting with the third. Uh, as a parent, this is something that we started to have our children quite young. We were 20. By 30, we had three children. So at 47, our youngest is 17 and our oldest is 21. So they are going through transition when we are also going through transition.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
both sides are trying to figure things out. And I think a lot of parents are in that same situation where you are in this midlife situation and your children are teenagers. So what have you observed there, and what's your advice to parents who are going through their own challenges when their children are going through challenges?
Oh God, I don't like giving advice. Um, I think we all eventually figure things out. Um, we learn. Um, there's a fascinating there's fascinating research that shows that our resilience scores increase as we age. So looking at people in their 40s, they have a certain resilience score. People in their 50s, it's higher. People in the 60s, it's higher. And going through the process you just described, the pain, the difficulty, the craziness of that process, it's also very heartwarming. It's a very big mix of things going on in what you just described. We know through research now that we come out of that more resilient. Eventually, we learn, we get better, we learn to let go. So I guess I wouldn't give advice. It's more know that you're going through a profound period of transformation in your life, and know that coming out at the other end is pretty amazing and fantastic, and you have a new life ahead. Not just because the kids are going to be gone and that you're going to be with your wife and have more free time and all that kind of thing, but that's there too. But just all of this stuff that's happening, that there's a huge, beautiful future. I think that's what I forgot. I thought I was near the end and I had to make things work. So when I'm coaching people now in their 50s and they think I'm on my last gig, I'm CFO, COO, this is my last thing. I really need to make it last, make it work before I retire. But really, you might have another 40 years ahead of you that you want to be active. So I would look at it more as a transition phase that would be kind of creating the assets that'll serve you for the next few decades.
And on the first change, you talk about physiological and also all the neurological changes happening. How do we, what are the key elements within those changes, and how do we transform them into forces that serve us?
Part of the transformation into forces that serve us, what I love the most is that it's kind of an automatic emergence. We're washed in these changes. These changes are blowing our lives apart. And just naturally, by going through them, we come out and there's the potential to tap into superpowers. So I look at it, your question is slightly different, is how do I most take advantage of these superpowers that are emerging within me? Because you could just turn away from them, and they're there, but you could ignore them and not use them. The main way that I found that happens is if we hold on too long to who we were in the past. So if I was a very, very good CFO and I always knew all the details of the spreadsheet and everything, and I'm really angry and upset with myself because I'm not remembering all the details anymore the way I used to, and I've become hard and brittle, the new superpowers won't emerge. But if I say, okay, my prefrontal cortex isn't working as good as it was, but I got new stuff coming in, let me see what that new stuff, where that takes me. So it's a letting go of the past that becomes really critical so that these new things can emerge. It's not so much that I have to work on having them emerge. It's more that I have to get out of the way. I have to get out of the way because they're there.
Absolutely. And you talked about the couple of books that you wrote, covering those topics. Would you mind telling us how you went about starting the journey of writing, and what do you cover specifically in each book?
So writing, I've always loved writing, and I had two books that I wrote when I was still CEO that were in that space on a new way to pay. One of the books was called A New Way to Pay. So I knew that I'd be writing again in this career once I was deep into the career. The first book, The Eagle That Drank Hummingbird Nectar, came out a couple of years ago. That one is a novel. It's a fictionalized account of me at 50 when I was going through the transition. But it's fictionalized, so I was able to play and really make it a novel as opposed to just a how-to book or anything like that. Around 20% of what I describe in the book really happened. It was real stuff, and maybe 80% is just fictionalized. Um, I like to say that the protagonist in the book, is me, but a much smarter version of me who learns after one mistake rather than making the same mistake over and over and over again. So his transformation happens like in a few months, whereas for me it took a few years to go through. But it's written as a novel, so there's a twist at the end that gives new understanding of everything that happened before it. Um, and it was very hard to write because it was a novel. I had several writing coaches as I was working. It took me 4 or 5 years to write that one. I threw out a number of drafts, a number of versions, and started again. And I had one coach in particular, a writing coach, who would really tear it apart um, when I was learning to go through the process of telling a story rather than teaching the reader. So she would say, that paragraph, you're still teaching. And I would look at it, I said, that's not teaching. I'm telling the story. And she said, no, read it again. You're teaching. And I would read it again and say, okay, yeah, that is teaching. So it was a very illuminating process of getting the teaching voice out. I have a very strong teaching voice. Um, the second one came out much faster because it's a mix of fiction, a mix of poetry, and it's in my voice. So it's less of a real novel, and it has a mix more. There's a framework, what I just described, with the 3 winds of change, the 6 midlife leadership superpowers that emerge naturally from those 3 winds of change, but with stories of 4 CEOs, of what they're experiencing going through midlife. There's a chapter that's set to 10 years in the future, exploring where these things lead to or could lead to. There's a chapter on poetry, which is simply an email thread between these 4 CEOs as they play around with poetry. So it's not it's not a full-blown business book. It's fiction with business. So it's different from the novel, but same topic. It's the same topic.
All about transformation. Would you mind walking us through the 6 superpowers then that you cover in your second book? What are they?
So the 6 superpowers. The first one is called humility and iron will, and it comes. Your listeners, many of them would recognize Jim Collins' Good to Great. That was the 6th level or the 5th level of his leadership framework, which leaders have a mix of humility and iron will. He wrote, this was 30 years ago, he wrote that he wasn't sure if you could develop humility and iron will. He thought maybe it was innate. And now when I look at writers like Jim Collins from back then, he was 38 when he wrote and published his book. A lot of the business writers that are really big today, their theories and their frameworks came out before they experienced midlife. So I think he missed the wealth of things that happen at midlife. Senior executives that reach to C-suite positions in their 40s, 50s, obviously they have a lot of iron will, otherwise they wouldn't be there. The things that happen in life, the physiological changes, the neurological, the kids growing up and how teenagers speak to their parents and then they leave, and the stuff we go through brings it's hard not to have humility come into our lives when we've gone through some of these things. If we push against it and we try to be obstinate, we can keep the humility out. If we let it come in, it's there. So humility and iron will is the central one, is one of the is the first. The second I call continual rebirth. It's at that age we become aware that we've been many different people. The parent we were when we had young children is a very different parent from the parent we become when we have a teenager. So we start to realize that we've gone through transformation many, many times in our life so far. So the idea of rebirthing constantly, it becomes something that's easier to accept, that we're simply on a journey of continual rebirth. We're not fixed. I think that starts to become quite clear at that time. The third one I call balance. Life has seasons, and we're different people in those seasons. Literally different people. So we do change. The third one is boundless ideation. It's beyond creativity. It's the ability, it's the two hemispheres talking to each other more. So we're able to be innovative in ways that we might not have been able to younger. We can take two very different ideas and put them together, or get some creativity, get some innovative idea from things that are not necessarily connected. We see connections that we didn't necessarily see before, which is why I call it boundless. It's a wonderful skill, a wonderful gift as our organizations become more complex and we need to be able to innovate across boundaries in our organization. That starts to play very nicely in that space. Which leads to the next superpower. It's total ownership. This is where we start to realize that our ownership is not simply our function, our role. It's also a wider ownership of the whole enterprise, the community, the ecosystem that we function in, even our relationship with competitors. So this notion of total ownership, we've mastered our function, we've mastered our area of expertise, and now at this age we can start going beyond that and letting that go a bit and seeing that we can have a broader sense of ownership, which is vital when we're at the C-suite level, and it's one of the most important mindset shifts when we're on the C-suite is to no longer represent our function and simply represent the organization, and we just happen to have a specialization in a function. The next one is timeless impact. Timeless impact is when so some people talk about legacy. A lot of times at that level, we're not really thinking about legacy in terms of what people are going to remember of us when we're gone and all that. It's more, what I develop is more a sense of my impact in this moment now is timeless. So we start to become aware that in the moment we're having an impact that could ripple into the future. And it's not thinking about the future. It's really being present in this moment, kind of in a timeless manner. So it's a different form of legacy. Legacy is a more intellectual conversation. Timeless impact is legacy as presence, if you like. That I'm not thinking about my legacy in the future.
The different dimension of time.
Yeah, and that it's this moment that really creates the most enduring things in the future. So rather than creating and something that's going to go out, so it's not in the future, it's now. It's hard to explain. And the final one. So it comes from It comes from, there's a topic I talk about now. It's not in the book. I call it radical. What it is, it's a way of being in the moment that is radically empowering to the people around us. It's not what you do, it's not what you say, it's just the presence that creates a sense of empowerment, because the presence is filled with this unwavering conviction that the people you're with are extremely capable and will achieve whatever they want to achieve. And when you bring that presence in, it creates an impact. And this timeless impact is very much related to that. Which is why, in a pragmatic sense, legacy is kind of a manifestation of that. And the final one I call life synergy, where we finally realize how we can have. So work-life balance is not a conversation with people in their 50s, in my experience. It's a conversation in our 20s and early 30s. At some point, that conversation starts to dissipate, and we start to get clarity that actually this is all my life, and the balance and all that. It's the synergy that's more important. So we make peace with areas that we can't change. We change the areas that we can. We move away from relationships that we don't want anymore. So all of this creates a kind of a unified synergy to our life.
Indeed, indeed. And in the workplace, especially in C-suite, then we tend to have a larger representation of people within that age bracket, coupled in the same place, going through the same challenges personally. What is that dynamic like? What have you observed when coaching management and leadership teams?
I love that question, and I'm seeing that the potential for individual transformation is much bigger and faster when it's done in a team environment of people that work together, because the energies can feed off of each other. There's conflict in these groups. There's trauma sometimes in these groups. There are disagreements. There's the need to learn how to interact with somebody that functions in a completely different way than we function, and that thinks in a very different way. So all these things create a very strong pressure cooker environment for a lot of human transformation to occur individually and as a team. And it's quite endearing to me, quite moving to see how the team can improve in effectiveness very quickly when they see how they're each changing together. I don't have examples. I can't think of examples that. All right, I can give you an example. One of the C-suite members had a client. It was during a retreat, and he stood up and shared. He was very frustrated, and he'd been quite angry with his colleagues for quite a while, very critical of his colleagues. And then he shared that his daughter was graduating from high school and would soon be leaving to go to college, and he would never have her living at home again, and he had wasted the opportunity of really spending quality time with her in the last months because he'd been so busy with work, and basically blaming these people for creating an ineffective environment that took him away. And it was quite moving. But simply sharing that allowed it to then be released and go away. And then immediately he would, well, an hour or two later, it was clear that he knew that he would see her again. It's just that their relationship was changing. It's not the fault of the people that he was with, but being able to express it allowed it to go. So then the whole team kind of grows because they see that they also have stuff to express. So getting kind of our demons out and seeing that as a team we grow because we all have demons, and then the team becomes more effective together. It's not one individual that's really effective, it's the whole team grows. So those are very powerful moments, and we are social beings. We're not individual beings. We don't live in caves by ourselves. So any kind of personal development work that's only on the one person, I'm losing interest in that. I have far greater interest on these complex team dynamics in order to grow. There's so many times when I finish a retreat that one of the participants will come up. Well, they'll say to everyone, "I feel so human. I feel so much more human now." And that's not why they come into the retreat. They come in because they want to be more effective as a team. But what comes out of it is that we're more human because we're interacting better as human beings, as a team. And then we're able to create magic much better than we were before.
And what, how can CEO and executives cultivate resilience and adaptability to navigate through that period? How can they manage that more effectively?
Well, there are lots and lots of techniques, but at that time, people in their 50s, they know the techniques. They know about mindfulness, they know about meditation. Some of them have found their own ways. They go swimming or go for a run. They know how to do all that. My message to them, my message to them is, you already know how to do this. You already know how to become more resilient. You've become more resilient in your own life. You've navigated bigger problems, bigger challenges throughout your life than anything that is happening here with this group or with your organization. So I would remind them that they already know that stuff. They don't have new things to learn on that. And if they do want to learn something new, they know where to go look for it. They know how to go get a podcast on mindfulness. They know how to go download an app. They know how to do all that stuff. They've done it probably. So I'm not there to teach them anything. I'm there to help them see that they're already capable and they're already human. They don't become more human. They're already human.
Hmm. And how does what's your definition of leadership? You know, based on your personal experience and the work you've done with all these leaders, how would you define leadership?
The simplest definition that I've ever heard, and the only one that ever comes to me when I'm asked that question, is people choose to follow you. I can't think of anything else. People choose to follow you. It doesn't mean that you have the rank. It doesn't mean that you've got the right title. It's that people choose to follow you. Other than that, it's more stylistic.
Does that change over the years when you are in your late 20s, 30s, and when you are in this midlife period? How do you go about inspiring more people to follow you and improving in your leadership?
Wow. The answers to that would be infinite, I think. It really depends on the person. I wouldn't be able to know that. The only test is to look around over your shoulder. Are they following or not? If they're not following, then you're not leading. We know them. We see those people. Even their 20s and stuff. We see people who are quite inspiring.
You talked about having to go through that process of telling more stories and teaching when you were writing
Yeah.
your first novel. And what would you say? How important is storytelling when it comes to leadership and people in the C-suites of corporations?
I don't know how you can be a leader at any age without telling stories. I don't know if that's possible. When I was running my company, I often felt like I was writing a novel. It was a weird feeling. Um, and I know the reason I felt that was because I was kind of inventing a vision of the future. I was telling a story of where things could be. I was painting what's wrong with the status quo in the environment that we were in. That's all storytelling. I have never met anybody at the C-suite that couldn't tell a great story, even though a lot of times they say, "Oh, I'm not a storyteller." Uh, you go, "Yeah, but 2 minutes ago that was a story you were telling."
Is there anything we can do to become better storyteller?
We can practice storytelling. We can The coach that I had that I remember the most when I was writing my novel, her name is Lisa Cron, and she wrote a book called Wired for Story. And her book is about the neuroscience that shows that our brains crave stories. So we are wired for stories. We're not wired for spreadsheets. We're wired for stories. And when we realize that and we practice it and we become conscious of the stories that we're telling, we can get quite good at telling stories quite effectively.
I also believe a lot in the importance of telling stories. I was at a workshop the other month with Bo Eason. Bo Eason is a former NFL player. He's a great storyteller. You know, he took his work as in the NFL and wrote a play and played this. He took his play across the U.S. to all the way to Broadway, and he played that for a very long time. And after retiring from that part of his life, he's been coaching ever since and bringing those leaders together to teach them how to tell great stories and how to embody the story in their physicality. And this was a powerful experience for me going through his workshop, and that's something that can serve in the C-suite and bringing our whole self in what we are doing. How do you help leaders align their personal transformation with the evolving needs of their organization?
Oh, I don't start with their personal transformation. I start with they want to be better as a team. Um, they bring me in. The CEO normally would bring someone like me in when they realize that the C-suite team himself or herself and the team need to be more effective together. They probably realize that the team is acting as a group of very good, excellent individuals and not so good as a team. So that's where I come in, is to work with them so that they become more effective as a team. Transforming individually is kind of a side benefit. It's secondary almost. So I don't start it with let's do a personal transformation. It's just that it's hard to avoid transforming when when you're trying to transform as a team. It's hard not to transform individually. You'd have to really resist it. I don't know if it's possible.
from your experience, what makes a great team? How do we go from a dysfunctioning team to a team that perform better together and is able to really deliver for the company?
Yeah. One of my favorite books is by Patrick Lencioni called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, which I'm probably familiar with. And he mentions the five elements of the pyramid. The base is trust. And there's also conflict, there's accountability. And generally, teams suffer, especially across Asia. I haven't worked with US teams in a long time. But generally, trust is an issue. People aren't sure if they can trust each other at that level. Generally, there is a focus on one's own area of expertise. So they're not owning the overall goals, the overall needs of the enterprise. So a well-functioning team, a C-suite team, is where there's a high level of trust between all of the participants, all the members. They can give each other candid feedback on what's holding the team back without breaking. So they can really have candid, direct conversations. They can have conflict in a way that is constructive, and it doesn't mean respectful conflict. They can be very harsh, but they know that the intentions are good, so they're not challenging the intentions. And they have a strong sense of ownership of the overall objectives of the group. And they, even though they may have a special function, they know that they can that their feedback on other areas is valuable. So before getting to that point, you'll see something like, if the team is talking about a brand transformation, the CTO is silent because he or she feels like they have nothing to add. In a team that's working well, even the CTO is giving their thoughts and their feedback and stuff on the brand transformation. Even though they don't have the same background, they're giving it their angle. So there's an awareness that their point of view matters. And it's coming from them. It's their awareness that they have value beyond simply their function. So these are just kind of little tidbits that show a C-suite team that's working well. I'll notice it like I have an image of a wagon wheel. When you come into a C-suite and it looks like the CEO, it looks like it's not a wagon wheel, the CEO is in the middle and everyone's standing around, but it feels like that if there's a conversation, first the CEO has a conversation with one person on one topic. And then the topic shifts and they're turning and they're having a conversation with another person on a different topic. And it's all this back and forth with the CEO at the middle. And the CEO becomes exhausted and they can't get buy-in. In an environment that's working well, the CEO is just one of them. And there's a lot of conversation from different people. You're hearing all the voices in the room. And the CEO is just simply there kind of holding space for these voices to really emerge. So it's a very different kind of team dynamic.
Now, Aneace, this has been a really great conversation so far. And working gradually toward the end of our time here today, I've got those few typical questions. Usually I ask the guests what advice you'll give your younger self. With you, I will be more specific and say, if you will go back to 47 years old Aneace, what advice would you give him?
I would remind him that he has a long future ahead, that he has multiple paths in life still ahead. You don't just have one path in life. I think I had blinders on at that time. There's just one path. I'm a techie. I think I'd remind him of that. You've got lots of paths ahead, and some of them are quite beautiful paths. So Don't put all of your dreams and hopes just on this one path. Let it go.
I guess the challenge in that phase, well, while I'm one of is you see all the possibilities. But then how do you decide which path to take? With a hindsight, how would you help Aneace find which path to take and harness all the wealth of experiences I accumulated thus far?
I don't think that matters. I think what matters is the awareness that there are multiple paths. There are many potential paths ahead. I think that's enough. Just pick one for now. Change it if it doesn't work. It's just that awareness. I think that's much more important than which path you choose.
And if you were to talk to your future self 10 years from now, what would you want him to, what message would you have for your future self? I came up with this question as I'm currently reading the book of Benjamin Hardy on your future self. And I'm getting more and more fascinating about the power of bringing your future self into what you're doing now. And I think I'm going to ask this question more and more around me.
I think it's a really, really good question. There's a big question that I'm grappling with now, and I'm allowing it to just stay as a question. I'm not looking for the answer. It's what is it that we create in our 60s and 70s? I know what we create in our 30s, our 40s. I created an enterprise in my 30s, 40s. And I know we keep creating in our 60s and 70s and beyond. But my big question is, I don't think it's the same things that we create. It's something different. What is it that we create in our 60s and 70s? So I'd be curious to what my future self, what kind of answer my future self has come up with.
Yes, yes. And what are 3 book recommendations that you will have for our audience today? Books that have had a profound impact on you, or things that you think is important to be reminded of.
So one book is The Wisdom Paradox. It's by a very renowned neuroscientist. His name is Elkonon Goldberg. The Wisdom Paradox. And it was the first book that I read with research on what happens at midlife in the brain, the transformations, the slowing down of the prefrontal cortex, the hemispheres speaking more with each other. So that was a fascinating book. What's another book? Well, an obvious book is Patrick Lencioni, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I think that's a very powerful book on team dynamics. And I have, can I give you 4?
Sure.
Okay, so that makes my choice a lot easier. So one of them is a book I mentioned earlier by Lisa Cron, C-R-O-N, Wired for Story. And that one is on how our brains are wired for stories. So it's an extremely important topic. And the other one is from one of my closest colleagues here in Singapore, Fabrice Desmarescaux. He wrote The Art of Retreats. And it's a book for senior executives, C-suite CEOs on the need to have retreats, whether that's going away for a few days in silence or whether it's simply 10 minutes in the afternoon of some kind of a retreat. Because we're so busy in life, we're so busy doing things that our brains are not functioning as well as they could be. And it's through retreats and through mindfulness and things like that that we're able to create space for our brains to really function in a much more effective manner. So these are all kind of the books that I would come up with today.
And obviously, your book, I think, very important for our audience
Obviously,
to
my
have. Would you
books.
remind us of the titles?
Yeah. So the latest book is called Soaring Beyond Midlife: The Surprisingly Natural Emergence of Leadership Superpowers in Life's Second Half. And the book just before that, the novel, is called The Eagle That Drank Hummingbird Nectar. Yeah, those two books. So they go together, very different styles, but the same topic from two very different angles.
Aneace, we covered a lot of things today. And what is one question that you wish I'd asked you, and how would you have answered it? If I open it more widely, you talk about the question that is in your mind at the moment about what we create in our 60s. Is there a question, a much broader question that you think, in general, is important for us to have an answer to when it comes to leadership and managing effectively as a team and team dynamics?
There's something I talk about in my second book, something related to resilience, which you brought up a few times. I don't like the word resilience because it's a reaction to something and it's a bouncing back. There's an idea that I'm reacting to something bad, resisting it or getting on it, it doesn't break me, and I bounce back stronger. But it's like going back to status quo, sort of. I've come up with a term I call joyful rejuvenation rather than resilience. It's a process of joyfully rejuvenating. And something has happened to me, it's changing me, I'm becoming a new person. Yeah, it's bothersome, it's frustrating, it's quite painful sometimes. But finding the joy, I'm alive, I'm changing, I'm rejuvenating, I have an opportunity to start fresh, and I'm alive. So there's something about finding joy. It goes back to the happiness curve that we talked about at the beginning of our conversation.
Yes, finding joy. And I think I'm talking a lot to a lot of people for the podcast, and recently I've seen a theme, a lot of people talking about leaving their corporate life and starting a coaching business, entrepreneurial business, and I think they're all in search of that joy and finding
Yeah.
themselves, and then you see someone leaving something that other people trying to go into, like you left your tech entrepreneur journey when a lot of people try to get into that. So what's your take on all these questioning that people seems to have a lot about finding what makes them happy or give them fulfillment?
I think it's all a creative process. Everybody is searching to create in their way. I don't think there's a right or wrong way. It's just searching and creating, and it's so fundamentally human. For hundreds of thousands of years, we've just kept pushing forward, going to new places, discovering new things. Yeah, it's just who we are, I think, as human beings.
Aneace, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure and delight having this conversation with you. Where can our audience find you if they want to continue this conversation?
So my first name has such a unique spelling that I have the website. The easiest way is www.aneace.com, Aneace.com. And that links to my professional site, to LinkedIn, to my books and all that. So it's very easy because my name is unique. It has a unique spelling.
Very good. Thank you very much, Aneace. And
Thank you,
yeah, look
Max.
forward to finding out what do we do in our 60s.
Yeah, 60s and 70s. 60s and 70s. Let's keep
60s and
that gap.
70s.
Yeah. Thank you, Max. Wonderful talking with
Thank
you.
you. This was the Maxia Leadership Podcast. Thank you for joining us. To listen to future episodes, you can subscribe on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. Until next time, keep being the leader everybody trusts and respects.